There's a version of this you've probably lived. A task you need to do. Something important. Maybe even something you genuinely want, and you sit down to do it, and nothing happens. Not because you forgot, not because you don't care. You care deeply. That's part of what makes it worse. You just can't move. You open the tab, close it, open it again. You find yourself reorganizing your desk, making tea you don't want, scrolling through something you're not even reading. And underneath all of it, a voice, quiet but persistent. What is wrong with you? You've probably answered that question with one word: lazy. But here's what that word doesn't explain. Why does it happen most on the things that matter most? Why does it get worse the harder you try to push through? Why does it feel less like unwillingness and more like being held down by something you can't name? The answer isn't in your work ethic. It's in your nervous system. And once you understand what it's actually doing, everything about this pattern makes a different kind of sense. Let's look at what this actually feels like from the inside. You wake up with intentions, a list, a plan, a genuine desire to make the day count. And for a while, maybe an hour, maybe a morning, you move through it. But then something shifts. Maybe you hit a task with stakes attached, a project that matters, a decision with real consequences. Something where the outcome reflects on you in a way you can feel, and the movement slows. You don't decide to stop. You just stop. The energy that was there a moment ago has quietly left the room. What replaces it is something harder to name. Not sleepiness exactly, not boredom, more like a kind of thickness. A heaviness in the body that makes simple things feel enormous. A flatness in the mind where momentum used to be. So you do what most people do. You try to push through it. You tell yourself to focus, to be disciplined. You make another list. Set a timer. Promise yourself a reward. And sometimes it works briefly, conditionally, at the cost of attention that lingers long after the work is done. But often it doesn't. And each time it doesn't, the story hardens. I lack discipline. I'm not built for this. Other people manage. I don't. That story becomes part of your identity. You start designing your life around the assumption of your own limitation, underselling yourself in professional spaces, avoiding projects that require sustained output, apologizing preemptively for the version of you that might not show up. And the cruelest part is that this pattern tends to be worst for the people who care the most. Not the indifferent, not the disengaged, the ones who genuinely want to do good work, who hold themselves to standards that matter, who feel the gap between who they are and who they intended to be with a particular, bone deep clarity. This isn't laziness. Laziness implies you don't care. What you're describing is something else entirely. Something your body is doing to you, not something your character is failing to do for you. Here is something that took researchers decades to fully understand, and that most people will go their entire lives without being told. Inaction is not always a failure of will. Sometimes it is a success of protection. The freeze you experience, the thickness, the flatness, the inexplicable paralysis in the face of something that matters, is not your body giving up. It is your nervous system executing a survival protocol it was designed to run. Not metaphorically, neurologically. And the fact that it runs in response to a work task rather than a physical predator doesn't make it less real. It makes it more confusing. Because the threat your system is responding to isn't a threat you can see. It's a threat that lives inside the task itself. The possibility of failure, of being exposed as insufficient, of trying your best and finding out your best isn't enough. For a nervous system that has learned to treat uncertainty as danger, and many of ours have, For reasons we'll get into, that kind of threat is enough to trigger the same ancient response that kept your ancestors still in long grass while something dangerous moved nearby. You are not lazy. You are, in the most literal biological sense, hiding. And the first step toward changing that is understanding exactly what you're hiding from and why your brain decided that hiding was safer than moving. And the difference matters more than you might think. To understand what's happening, you need to know about a framework called Polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges. It describes the autonomic nervous system, the part of you that operates beneath conscious thought, as having three distinct states, each governing a different mode of engagement with the world. The first is ventral vagal, the state of safety. When you're here, you're regulated, connected, capable. Work flows. Thinking is clear. You can take on complexity without shutting down. The second is sympathetic activation, the state of mobilization, fight or flight, heart rate up, energy surging through the body. This is the state that produces urgency, anxiety, reactive output, functional under acute pressure, costly over time. The third, and the one almost no one talks about in conversations about productivity, is dorsal vagal shutdown. This is the oldest branch of the nervous system, evolutionarily ancient, pre-mammalian in origin. It activates when the system determines that a threat cannot be fought or escaped. And when it activates, it does something precise. It withdraws energy from the body. Heart rate drops. Cognition narrows. Executive function, the part of the brain responsible for planning, initiating action, and sustaining effort, goes quiet. The body becomes heavy, slow, unresponsive to instruction. This is not a choice. This is physiology. And here's the part that explains everything about the pattern you've been living. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between a physical threat and a perceived identity threat, between a predator in the environment and the terror of being seen and found lacking, between mortal danger and the possibility that this project, if you finish it and it fails, will confirm everything you feared about yourself. To the dorsal vagal system, threat is threat. The response is identical. The mental model to hold here is this. Imagine your nervous system as a circuit breaker. When too much electrical load runs through the system, when the emotional charge attached to a task exceeds what the circuit can hold, the breaker trips, not as punishment, not as malfunction. As protection, the power goes out so the wiring doesn't burn. And no amount of telling the circuit breaker to try harder will restore the power. You have to first reduce the load, then reset the system. Then carefully restore the current. This is what working with shutdown looks like. Not forcing through it, but understanding the load and deliberately reducing it until the system feels safe enough to move again. So what does that actually look like in practice? Here are 5 principles for working with a nervous system in shutdown, not against it. The first intervention is identification, not action. Most people respond to shutdown by escalating pressure, more urgency, more self-criticism, harder pushes. This activates the sympathetic system on top of dorsal shutdown, creating a neurological conflict. The body is simultaneously trying to freeze and flee. The result is the anxious paralysis many people know well. The feeling of being unable to move but also unable to rest. What to do? When you notice the thickness arriving, the flatness, the sudden inability to begin, name it without judgment. Not, I'm being lazy, but my system is in shutdown right now. Why it works. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman on affect labeling shows that naming an internal state simply, accurately, reduces activation in the amygdala and restores partial access to prefrontal cortex function. You are, in a measurable sense, turning the lights back on just by naming what's happening. Real-life example. You sit down to write a proposal that matters. Your mind goes blank. You feel the heaviness arrive. Instead of immediately opening social media or criticizing yourself, you say quietly, "This feels threatening to my system right now." That's what's happening. Something in the pressure releases slightly, not because the task changed, because you stopped fighting the symptom and acknowledged the signal. Shutdown is triggered by perceived threat magnitude. The larger the task feels, the more the system interprets it as a threat. The more it interprets it as a threat, the deeper the shutdown. The way out is not willpower, it's threat reduction. What to do? Make the first action so small it carries almost no emotional weight. Not write the proposal, but open a blank document and type one sentence. Not go to the gym, but put on the shoes. Why it works. This is grounded in what behavioral psychologist B.J. Fogg calls tiny habits, but the neural mechanism beneath it is more specific. Small, achievable actions restore what's called self-efficacy, the felt sense that you are capable of producing an outcome. Self-efficacy activates the ventral vagal state and gradually shifts the nervous system out of shutdown and toward engagement. The circuit breaker resets not through force, but through a series of small, successful completions that tell the system, this is survivable. Real-life example. You've been avoiding a difficult email for 4 days. Every time you think about it, you close the laptop. Today you open it. Type the subject line only. Close it. That's enough for now. Tomorrow you open it again. Add one sentence. The email gets written across 5 brief, low-stakes moments instead of one enormous high-stakes confrontation with your own avoidance. The nervous system lives in the body first. Before it reaches the mind, before it shapes thought or motivation or capacity, it is a physiological state. And physiological states respond to physiological inputs. What to do? Before attempting high-stakes work, spend 5 minutes in deliberate physiological regulation. This can be slow diaphragmatic breathing, specifically extending the exhale longer than the inhale. It can be gentle movement, cold water on the face. Any input that signals physical safety to the nervous system. Why it works. Research by physiologists Andrew Huberman and others has shown that extended exhalation specifically activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing heart rate and cortisol, and signaling the dorsal vagal system that the threat state can be released. You are not hacking your productivity. You are changing the physiological conditions under which the work is being attempted. Real-life example. Before sitting down to a creative project, you've been dreading for a week. You spend 5 minutes breathing slowly, outside or by a window. You're not procrastinating. You're preparing the system. The work you do afterward carries a different quality, not because you're more disciplined, because your nervous system is in a different state. Much of what triggers shutdown isn't the task itself. It's what the task means. Projects that feel safe, low-stakes errands, routine admin, familiar work, rarely produce shutdown. Projects where the outcome reflects on who you are, where failure would mean something about your worth, your intelligence, your right to take up space, those are the ones that floor the circuit breaker. What to do? Practice consciously separating the work from the verdict. Before you begin, name what the task is, and explicitly name what it is not. This is a draft. It is not a measure of my intelligence. This is a first attempt. It is not a referendum on my worth. Why it works. This is cognitive diffusion, a technique developed within acceptance and commitment therapy by Stephen Hayes, which involves creating psychological distance between an experience and the meaning you fuse to it. When the task stops carrying the full weight of your identity, the perceived threat decreases. The nervous system, registering a smaller load on the circuit, is less likely to trip the breaker. Real-life example, you need to record a video for work. Every time you sit down to it, something seizes. You realize the seizure isn't about the recording. It's about the possibility that people will watch it and think less of you. You write down, "This video is information delivery. It is not an audition for my worth." You record it anyway, imperfectly, and the world, as it often does, continues without incident. Every time a shutdown happens and goes unmaimed, every time you interpret it as laziness and move on, the story calcifies a little more. The identity hardens. This is who I am. What to do? After every episode of shutdown, however long it lasted, however much or little got done, spend 2 minutes writing a single honest reflection. What was the actual threat? What was the system responding to? What did I manage, even partially? Why it works. This practice activates narrative processing in the brain's left hemisphere, the part that constructs coherent stories from experience. Research by James Pennebaker on expressive writing consistently shows that narrative processing of difficult experiences reduces their physiological charge over time. You're not journaling for therapy. You're updating your brain's model of what happened, replacing "I failed again" with "my system responded to a threat, and I moved through it at whatever pace I could." Real-life example, you had a day where almost nothing got done. Instead of ending it with the familiar punishment, the low hum of self-directed shame that follows you into sleep, you write 3 lines. The task felt like a test of my worth. The system shut down to protect me from failing that test. I did 2 small things anyway. That's what was available. 3 lines. Different ending. Different morning. Here's the model. Your nervous system is a circuit breaker. It doesn't trip because you're weak. It trips because the load is too high, because the task has been fused to a threat your system was never designed to carry. The work isn't to force power through a tripped breaker. The work is to lower the load, regulate the system, reset the circuit, then restore the current slowly in small increments until the work becomes something the body can hold. Name the state. Shrink the first move. Regulate before you demand. Separate the task from the identity verdict. Repair the story afterward, not as a productivity strategy, as an act of accurate understanding, of knowing what your nervous system is, what it does, and what it actually needs from you. You've been carrying the word lazy for a long time. Maybe it was given to you by someone else. Maybe you arrived at it yourself, slowly across years of evidence you didn't know how to interpret any other way. Either way, it became part of how you understood yourself, and it was wrong. Not in the generous, self-help sense of, "You're not lazy, you're amazing." In the precise, neurological sense of, the behavior you were observing had a different cause than the one you assigned to it. Your system was protecting you, clumsily, inconveniently, at significant personal and professional cost, but protecting you. And you can work with a system that's trying to protect you. You can learn its language, understand its triggers, give it the conditions it needs to feel safe enough to move. That is not a small thing. That is the beginning of a completely different relationship with the part of yourself you've spent years fighting. You were never the problem. You were always the solution, waiting for the right question.